The auctioneer's gavel cracked against the wooden podium like a gunshot, and Adelaide Warren felt her knees threaten to buckle beneath her threadbare skirt. As she stood on the platform in the scorching afternoon sun of Greeley, Colorado, watching strange men assess her worth like she was nothing more than cattle. The year was 1878, and she had learned in the cruelest way possible that freedom was not a birthright, but a luxury that could be stripped away by debt, desperation, and the death of everyone who had ever cared whether she lived or died. Her father's gambling debts had mounted so high after his death that the bank had seized everything, including her indentured contract that her father had signed in a moment of whiskey-soaked foolishness, binding her to 7 years of servitude that she had barely begun to serve when her employer died, and his estate decided to auction off his assets, which apparently included her. The crowd of men before her was a mix of ranchers, merchants, and drifters, their eyes ranging from coldly calculating to openly lecherous. And Adelaide forced herself to keep her chin up, even as shame burned through her chest like hot coals. She was 22 years old, with auburn hair that hung in a tangled braid down her back, and green eyes that had once sparkled with dreams, but now held only a dull resignation. Her dress was patched and faded, her hands rough from work, and she knew she must look like exactly what she was, a woman with no choices left. "Do I hear $50?" the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the dusty square. $50 for a strong young woman, good for housework, cooking, and whatever else a man might need done around his property. Adelaide flinched at the implication in those words, but she kept her gaze fixed on a point somewhere above the crowd's heads, trying to pretend she was anywhere else. A few hands went up, and the bidding began in earnest. $60, $70. The numbers climbed slowly, and Adelaide felt sick to her stomach, wondering what kind of man would eventually own her contract, what he would expect from her, whether she would survive the next 7 years or simply disappear like so many other women in her position. Then a new voice cut through the proceedings, deep and steady and completely devoid of the excitement that tinged the other bidders' calls. $200. The crowd went silent, heads turning to locate the source of such an outrageous bid. Adelaide's eyes followed the movement and landed on a tall man standing at the back of the gathering, his broad shoulders blocking out the sun. He wore a dusty brown hat pulled low over his face, a leather vest over a plain cotton shirt, and worn denim pants tucked into scuffed boots. Everything about him spoke of hard work and harder living, but there was something in his stance that suggested confidence rather than arrogance, capability rather than cruelty. The auctioneer recovered quickly from his surprise. $200. Do I hear 210? Silence stretched across the square. $200 was more than most men made in 6 months, and apparently no one was willing to compete with such an astronomical sum. The auctioneer called out twice more, then brought his gavel down, with a finality that made Adelaide's heart lurch in her chest. "Sold to the gentleman in the back for $200. Adelaide watched as the tall man made his way through the parting crowd, his stride unhurried but purposeful. As he drew closer, she could make out more details: a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, tan skin that spoke of endless hours under the sun, and eyes the color of storm clouds that met hers briefly before he looked away, as if he found the whole situation as uncomfortable as she did. He conducted his business with the auctioneer quickly, counting out bills from a worn leather wallet with the ease of someone who had saved carefully for something important. Adelaide noticed his hands were large and calloused, the hands of a working man, and she found herself wondering what he did for a living, what he wanted with an indentured servant, what he would expect from her. When the paperwork was signed and the money exchanged, the man finally turned to face her fully. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably no more than 28 or 30, with features that might have been handsome if they were not so carefully neutral. He tilted his head slightly, studying her for a long moment before speaking. "My name is Harrison Vance," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. We will go there now, but first, do you need anything from wherever you were staying?" The question surprised her. She had expected orders, not inquiries. "I have a small bag at the boarding house," she managed to say, her voice hoarse from hours of standing in the sun without water. "It is not much?" He nodded once. "We will get it." Harrison turned and started walking, clearly expecting her to follow. Adelaide fell into step behind him, acutely aware of the eyes still watching them, the whispers that followed in their wake. Her legs felt unsteady after standing still for so long, but she forced herself to keep moving, to match his long strides as best she could. They walked in silence through the dusty streets of Greeley until they reached the boarding house where Adelaide had spent the previous night in a cramped room with 3 other women in similar circumstances. Harrison waited outside while she retrieved her bag, which contained nothing more than a change of clothes, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, and a small Bible with her family's names written on the inside cover. Everything else she had ever owned was gone, sold or seized or lost. When she emerged, Harrison took the bag from her without asking, carrying it easily in one hand. He led her to where his horse was tied, a large buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. Harrison secured her bag to the saddle, then turned to her with an expression she could not quite read. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Not well," Adelaide admitted. "I have only been on a horse a few times." Harrison nodded, as if he had expected this answer. "You will ride with me then. It is not far." He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down to offer her his hand. Adelaide hesitated for only a moment before taking it, gasping slightly as he lifted her up, as if she weighed nothing at all. She found herself seated in front of him, acutely aware of the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength in the arm that wrapped around her waist to hold her steady. "Hold on to the saddle horn," Harrison instructed, his breath stirring the loose strands of hair near her ear. "I will make sure you do not fall." Adelaide obeyed, gripping the leather-wrapped horn with both hands as Harrison guided the horse out of town at a steady walk. The afternoon sun beat down on them mercilessly, and Adelaide was grateful for the brim of Harrison's hat that provided at least some shade. She could feel the tension in her shoulders, the uncertainty that coiled in her stomach like a snake. She wanted to ask him what he expected from her, what her duties would be, whether he was a cruel man or a kind one, but the words stuck in her throat. They rode in silence for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes. The landscape around them was vast and open, rolling grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains, dotted here and there with scrub brush and the occasional cottonwood tree following the path of a creek. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, and Adelaide found herself wondering if she would ever see anything else again. Finally, Harrison spoke. "I should tell you why I bought your contract." Adelaide tensed, bracing herself for whatever revelation was coming. "All right. My ranch is small but growing," he said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "I run cattle and break horses, and the work is hard. I lost my parents 3 years ago to fever, and I have been running the place alone since then. I need help with the cooking and cleaning, mending and such. The work is honest, and I will not ask anything of you that is not." There was something in his tone that made Adelaide turn her head slightly, trying to see his face. "What do you mean?" Harrison's jaw tightened. "I mean, I will not force myself on you, if that is what you are worried about. You will have your own room, and your privacy will be respected. I bought your contract because I need help, not because I wanted to buy a woman." The relief that flooded through Adelaide was so intense it made her dizzy. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "There is more," Harrison continued. "When we get to the ranch, I'm going to give you a choice. You can stay and work off your contract, and I will treat you fairly and pay you a small wage on top of providing room and board. Or I can give you enough money to get on a stage to Denver or wherever else you want to go, and you can start fresh somewhere new. The choice is yours." Adelaide stared at him in disbelief, twisting in the saddle to see if he was mocking her, but his expression was serious, almost somber, and she realized with a shock that he meant every word. "You would just let me go after paying $200? It is not right, what they did to you back there," Harrison said quietly. "Auctioning off human beings like they are property. I know your contract is legal, but that does not make it right. No one should have their freedom taken from them because of someone else's debts. So, I am giving you a choice, real freedom or a fair situation if you choose to stay." "Why would you do this?" Adelaide asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not even know me." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was indentured when she was young," he finally said, "before she met my father. The man who held her contract was cruel, and she bore scars from those years until the day she died. My father spent everything he had to buy her freedom, and she always said that was the moment she truly started living. I suppose I am doing this in memory of her, in hopes that somewhere, someone might do the same for another woman who needs it. Tears stung Adelaide's eyes, the first real tears she had allowed herself since her father's death. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything right now, Harrison said gently. Think about it. Decide what you want. We will talk when we get to the ranch. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, less fraught with fear and more filled with a tentative, fragile hope. Adelaide found herself relaxing slightly against Harrison's chest, no longer quite so afraid of the man who held her fate in his hands. The ranch, when it came into view, was modest but well maintained. A sturdy wooden house with a covered porch stood at the center, surrounded by a barn, a corral, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Adelaide could see chickens scratching in the dirt near the barn. Everything spoke of hard work and careful attention, of a man who took pride in what he had built. Harrison brought the horse to a stop in front of the house and dismounted smoothly before reaching up to help Adelaide down. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly as her feet hit the ground. Harrison steadied her with a hand on her elbow, waiting until she had her balance before stepping back. "Come inside," he said, picking up her bag. "You must be thirsty." Adelaide followed him into the house, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior. The main room was a combination kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace, a sturdy wooden table, and simple but solid furniture. Everything was clean, but clearly lacked a woman's touch, purely functional, with no decoration or softness. Harrison set her bag down by the door and moved to the kitchen area, where he poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to her. Adelaide drank gratefully, not realizing until that moment just how parched she was. The water was cool and sweet, probably from a well, and she drained the cup in several long swallows. "More?" Harrison offered, and she nodded. He refilled the cup, and she drank more slowly this time, feeling strength beginning to return to her limbs. "Sit down," Harrison said, gesturing to the table. "We should talk." Adelaide sat, her hands wrapped around the cup, watching as Harrison took the chair across from her. He removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that was slightly too long, curling at the ends. Without the hat shadowing his face, she could see him more clearly, and she realized he was actually quite handsome in a rugged, weathered way. There were lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun, and a small scar cut through his left eyebrow, but his features were strong and honest. "So," Harrison said, leaning back in his chair, "I meant what I said. You have a choice. I can give you $50 right now, which is enough to get you to Denver and keep you going for a few weeks while you find work. Or you can stay here, work for me, and I will pay you $5 a month on top of room and board. In either case, I will burn your indenture contract. You will be a free woman, whether you stay or go." Adelaide stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. $50 was more money than she had seen in years. She could go to Denver, maybe find work as a seamstress or a laundress, start a new life where no one knew about her father's disgrace or her own fall from grace. But she would be alone in a strange city, vulnerable, with no guarantee of finding honest work. Or she could stay here, on this quiet ranch with this strange, kind man who had just given her back something she thought she had lost forever, the power to choose her own path. "If I stay," she said slowly, "what exactly would my duties be?" Harrison considered the question. "Cooking, mostly. I am terrible at it, and have been living on beans and burnt meat for longer than I care to admit. Cleaning the house, mending clothes, tending the vegetable garden if you know how, maybe helping with the chickens and collecting eggs. Nothing beyond normal household work. I handle everything outside, the cattle, the horses, the barn, all of that. And you promise you would not—" Adelaide trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "I promise," Harrison said firmly, meeting her eyes. "You would have the bedroom upstairs. I sleep down here. The door has a lock if that makes you feel safer. I give you my word as a man and on my mother's memory that I will not touch you or force you into anything you do not want." There was such sincerity in his voice, such painful honesty in his eyes, that Adelaide found herself believing him. She thought about her options, weighed the risks and possibilities of each path. Denver might offer freedom, but it also offered uncertainty and danger. Here, she would have safety, honest work, and a wage of her own. And perhaps most importantly, She would have a choice in the matter. "I would like to stay," Adelaide said quietly, "if the offer is genuine." Something that might have been relief crossed Harrison's face. "It is genuine, but are you sure? You do not have to decide right now." "I am sure," Adelaide said, and realized she meant it. "I have nowhere else to go, no one waiting for me anywhere. At least here, I know what I'm getting. And you seem like a good man, Harrison Vance." Harrison stood and walked to the fireplace, where he reached up to the mantel and pulled down a sheaf of papers. He brought them to the table and spread them out. Her indenture contract, signed and official, with 7 years of servitude spelled out in cold legal language. Without ceremony, Harrison picked up the papers and tossed them into the fireplace, where the flames from the banked coals caught and consumed them quickly. "You are free," he said simply. "The law might say otherwise, but here on this ranch, you are free. You work for me because you choose to, and you are paid for your labor. If you ever want to leave, you can. Is that understood?" Adelaide nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She watched the last of the contract curl into ash and felt as if a weight she had been carrying for months had finally lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you," she managed to say. Harrison nodded once, then seemed to shake himself out of whatever emotion had gripped him. "You must be hungry. Let me show you where things are in the kitchen, and perhaps you can make us both something to eat. I am afraid the supplies are basic, but there is flour, salt pork, some canned vegetables, and eggs from the chickens." Adelaide stood, grateful for something practical to focus on. "I can make biscuits and gravy if you have the ingredients." "I do," Harrison said, and there was something almost like pleasure in his voice. "I have not had decent biscuits in years." He showed her around the kitchen, pointing out where he kept the flour and lard, the cast iron pans, and the wood stove. Adelaide set to work with the ease of long practice, mixing dough and cutting biscuits while Harrison fried salt pork in a heavy skillet. They worked in companionable silence, and Adelaide found herself relaxing incrementally, the constant fear that had dogged her for weeks finally beginning to fade. The biscuits turned out better than she had dared hope, golden and fluffy, and she made a thick gravy from the pork drippings that Harrison declared was the best thing he had tasted in months. They ate at the table as the sun sank lower in the sky, painting the windows with golden light. "Tell me about yourself," Harrison said eventually. "If you want to, that is. I realize we are essentially strangers." Adelaide hesitated, then decided that honesty was the least she owed this man who had given her back her freedom. "My mother died when I was 12, she said quietly. "My father raised me after that, and he tried his best, but he was not a strong man. He drank too much and gambled more than he should have. He ran up debts all over town, and eventually he signed an indenture contract for me without telling me, using it as collateral for more gambling money. When he died 6 months ago, the bank called in all his debts. They took everything we had, including my contract. I ended up working for a merchant named Dalton, who owned the general store, but he died 3 weeks ago, and his widow decided to sell off his assets rather than keep the business going." "So you got caught in a web not of your own making," Harrison said. "Exactly." Adelaide pushed the remains of her biscuit around her plate. "I never asked for any of this. I never wanted to be owned, to have no say in my own life. But there I was." "And now you are here," Harrison said. "And you do have a say, so use it. Tell me if there is anything you need, anything that would make staying here more bearable. I will do what I can to provide it." Adelaide looked at him, really looked at him, and saw genuine kindness in his eyes. "I think this will be all right," she said softly. "Thank you, Harrison." He smiled then, a small but real smile that transformed his serious face. "You are welcome, Adelaide." That first night, Adelaide slept in the upstairs bedroom under a clean quilt, the door locked as Harrison had suggested, though she found she was not particularly afraid. She was exhausted from the day's emotional turmoil, but beneath the tiredness was a spark of something she had not felt in a long time: hope. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both foreign and comforting. Adelaide woke early to make breakfast, learning what Harrison liked and how much food a man who worked from dawn until dusk required. She cleaned the house thoroughly, amazed at how much dirt and dust had accumulated in every corner. She mended his clothes, finding shirts with missing buttons and pants with torn seams, evidence of a man who had been living alone for too long. Harrison, for his part, was unfailingly polite and respectful. He worked hard outside, tending to his cattle and horses, repairing fences and mucking out stalls. He came in for meals covered in dust and sweat, but he always washed up before sitting at the table, and he always thanked Adelaide for the food. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and kind. Adelaide found herself watching him sometimes when he did not know she was looking. She noticed the way he handled his horses with gentle firmness, speaking to them in low tones that calmed even the most skittish animals. She saw how he checked on injured cattle with genuine concern, and how he always made sure the chickens had fresh water, even when he was exhausted from a long day. He was, she realized, a fundamentally good man, and that realization made something warm unfurl in her chest, something dangerous and hopeful and terrifying, all at once. 2 weeks after Adelaide arrived at the ranch, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, violent and sudden, as summer storms in Colorado often were. The sky turned dark green, and lightning split the heavens with terrifying beauty. Adelaide had always been afraid of storms, and this one was particularly fierce, shaking the house with every boom of thunder. She was in the kitchen cleaning up after supper when a lightning bolt struck close by, the crack of thunder following instantly. Adelaide yelped and dropped the plate she was holding, watching it shatter on the wooden floor. "Are you all right?" Harrison appeared in the doorway immediately, concern etched on his face. "I am sorry," Adelaide said, her voice shaking as she knelt to pick up the broken pieces. "I will clean this up. I am sorry." "Leave it," Harrison said, crossing the room quickly. "You are trembling. Are you hurt?" "No, I do not like storms," Adelaide admitted, feeling foolish. Another crash of thunder rattled the windows, and Adelaide flinched. Without thinking, Harrison reached out and took her hand, drawing her gently to her feet and away from the broken plate. "Come sit down," he said quietly. "I will clean up the plate later." He led her to the rocking chair near the fireplace and guided her into it, then stirred up the fire to provide more light as the storm darkened the world outside. Adelaide wrapped her arms around herself, trying to control her shaking. Harrison disappeared into his sleeping area and returned with a heavy blanket, which he draped around her shoulders. Then he pulled up a chair and sat near her, his presence solid and reassuring. "My mother was afraid of storms too," he said conversationally, clearly trying to distract her. She used to say it was because she had seen too many bad things happen during storms. A barn burned down when she was a child after being struck by lightning. Several people died. After that, she could never quite trust storms again. "That is terrible," Adelaide said, focusing on his voice rather than the chaos outside. "It was," Harrison agreed, "but my father learned how to help her through them. He would sit with her just like this, and he would tell her stories about good things that happened during storms, like the time it rained just enough to save their crops after weeks of drought, or the time I was born during the worst blizzard in 20 years, and my father said I came into the world howling louder than the wind." Despite her fear, Adelaide found herself smiling. "You were a noisy baby." "Apparently insufferable," Harrison said, and there was humor in his voice. "My mother said I had opinions about everything from the moment I arrived." They talked through the worst of the storm, Harrison sharing stories about his childhood and his parents, painting a picture of a loving family that had been torn apart too soon by illness. Adelaide found herself opening up as well, telling him about her mother, about the happy years before everything fell apart. When the storm finally passed, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of rain, Adelaide realized she had not been afraid for the last half hour, too caught up in conversation to notice the thunder fading into the distance. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That helped." "Anytime," Harrison said, and she could see he meant it. Something shifted between them that night, a barrier dropping away to reveal the possibility of something more than employer and employee, more than two strangers sharing a house. Adelaide went to bed thinking about the kindness in Harrison's eyes, the gentleness in his hands, and she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was not the only one feeling this strange pull of connection. The summer days grew longer and hotter, and Adelaide settled more fully into her role on the ranch. She discovered she enjoyed the work, the simple satisfaction of a clean house and a good meal, the pleasure of watching Harrison's face light up when he tasted something particularly delicious. She started tending the neglected vegetable garden, coaxing life from the dry soil and harvesting fresh greens and tomatoes that added variety to their meals. Harrison taught her to ride properly, patient with her nervousness and quick to praise her progress. They would ride out together sometimes in the evenings when the work was done, watching the sun set over the mountains while the horses grazed. These quiet moments became Adelaide's favorite part of the day, the easy silence between them growing into something comfortable and companionable. One evening in late July, they were sitting on the porch after supper, enjoying the slight coolness that came with twilight. Harrison was whittling a piece of wood, and Adelaide was mending a shirt, their chairs close enough that their elbows almost touched. "Can I ask you something?" Adelaide said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Of course," Harrison said, not looking up from his whittling. "Why did you never marry? A man like you, with a good ranch and a kind heart. Surely women must have been interested." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his knife stilling on the wood. "I was engaged once," he finally said, "right before my parents died. Her name was Catherine, and I thought she loved me. But when my parents passed and I was left with just the ranch and a mountain of debt from their medical bills, she decided she wanted someone with better prospects. She married a banker in Denver 6 months later." "I am sorry," Adelaide said softly. "That must have hurt." "It did," Harrison admitted, "for a long time. But looking back now, I realize she did me a favor. If she could not stand by me through hard times, she was not the right person to build a life with. I would rather be alone than be with someone who only wants me when things are easy." "You are not alone now," Adelaide said, then blushed, realizing how that sounded. "I mean, you have help now, with the ranch." Harrison looked at her then, really looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made Adelaide's breath catch. "No," he said quietly, "I am not alone now." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and Adelaide felt her heart begin to race. But then Harrison looked away, returning his attention to his whittling, and the moment passed. Adelaide went back to her mending, but her hands were shaking slightly, and she had to concentrate to keep her stitches even. That night, lying in bed, Adelaide admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Harrison Vance. It was foolish and reckless and probably doomed, but it was happening nonetheless. She loved the quiet strength in him, the gentleness that belied his rough exterior, the fundamental decency that guided every action he took. She loved the way he treated his animals with respect, the way he always thanked her for meals, the way he had given her back her freedom and then convinced her to stay anyway. But she had no idea if he felt the same way. He was kind to her, yes, but he was kind to everyone. He had made it clear from the beginning that he expected nothing from her beyond honest work. Perhaps that was all he would ever want from her, and perhaps she needed to accept that and guard her heart before it got broken. August arrived with blistering heat and the constant threat of drought. The cattle grew restless, and Harrison spent long days checking on them and moving them to better grazing. Adelaide worried about him, seeing how exhausted he was each evening, how the sun had burned his skin darker and deepened the lines around his eyes. She started packing him lunches and insisting he take them with him, and she made sure there was cool water waiting when he came home. She tended to the small cuts and scrapes he inevitably acquired, her hands gentle as she cleaned wounds and applied salve. Harrison submitted to her ministrations with surprising patience, sitting still while she fussed over him. "You do not have to do this," he said one evening as she wrapped a bandage around a particularly nasty gash on his forearm where barbed wire had caught him. "I know," Adelaide said. "I want to." "Why?" Harrison asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. Adelaide paused, trying to find words for feelings she barely understood herself. "Because you took care of me, when I had nothing and no one. It seems only fair that I should take care of you." "Is that the only reason?" Harrison's voice was soft, almost tentative. Adelaide looked up and found his eyes fixed on her face, intense and searching. Her breath caught, and for a moment she considered lying, protecting herself from potential rejection. But something in his expression gave her courage. "No," she said quietly, "it is not the only reason." "Adelaide," Harrison said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, they were interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Harrison was on his feet instantly, moving to the door with the kind of alertness that came from living in uncertain times. Adelaide followed, her heart pounding with a different kind of anxiety now. A rider appeared in the gathering dusk, his horse lathered with sweat. Adelaide recognized him as one of Harrison's neighbors, a rancher named Thomas Pierce, who had a spread about 10 miles west. "Harrison!" Thomas called out, dismounting quickly. "We have trouble. Rustlers hit my herd last night, took about 20 head. They are moving east, probably planning to cross into Kansas and sell the cattle there. I am gathering men to go after them. Will you come?" Harrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Give me 10 minutes to get ready." He turned to Adelaide, and she could see the regret in his eyes. "I have to go. This is important, not just for Thomas, but for all of us. If rustlers think they can operate freely around here, every ranch in the area will be at risk." "I understand," Adelaide said, though fear clutched at her chest. "Be careful." "I will," Harrison promised. He moved quickly, gathering his rifle, ammunition, and supplies. Adelaide packed food and filled canteens with fresh water, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced with worry. Within minutes, Harrison was ready to leave. He paused in the doorway, looking back at Adelaide with an expression she could not quite read. "When I get back," he said, "we need to finish that conversation." "Yes," Adelaide agreed, "when you get back." Then he was gone, riding off into the deepening night with Thomas, leaving Adelaide alone in the house with nothing but her fears and the unfinished conversation hanging between them like a promise. The next 3 days were the longest of Adelaide's life. She threw herself into work, cleaning everything that could be cleaned, baking enough bread to feed an army, tending the garden with almost obsessive care. But none of it could distract her from the constant worry that gnawed at her insides, the fear that Harrison might not come back, that she would lose him before she ever had the chance to tell him how she really felt. On the third evening, as Adelaide was preparing a simple supper she had no appetite for, she heard hoofbeats again. She ran to the door, her heart in her throat, and nearly sobbed with relief when she saw Harrison dismounting from his weary horse. He was covered in dust and clearly exhausted, but he was whole and unhurt. Adelaide did not think, did not plan, just ran out to meet him. Harrison caught her as she threw herself at him, his arms coming around her to hold her steady. "I am all right," he murmured into her hair. "I am here." "I was so worried," Adelaide said, her face pressed against his chest, breathing in the smell of dust and sweat and horses and him. "I thought something might happen to you." "We caught up with the rustlers," Harrison said. "There was a fight, but we got Thomas's cattle back. One of the rustlers was killed, the others arrested. It is over." Adelaide pulled back slightly to look up at him, needing to see with her own eyes that he was truly unharmed. Harrison looked down at her, and something in his expression made the world fade away until there was nothing but the two of them in the golden evening light. "Adelaide," he said hoarsely, "I need to tell you something before I lose my nerve." "Tell me," she whispered. "I did not bring you here planning to fall in love with you," Harrison said, the words tumbling out like he had been holding them back for too long. "I bought your contract to set you free, to give you choices. That was supposed to be the end of it. But then you stayed, and you have been here for weeks now, and somewhere along the way, everything changed. You changed everything. I wake up thinking about you. I spend my days looking forward to coming home because you are here. I find excuses to be near you, to talk to you, to hear you laugh. And these past 3 days, all I could think about was getting back to you, back home to you." Adelaide's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy and love so strong it felt like it might crack her chest open. "Harrison, I know I promised you would be free, that I would never force you into anything," Harrison continued, "and that promise still stands. If you do not feel the same way, we can go back to how things were, and I will never mention this again. But if there is any chance, any possibility that you might feel even a fraction of what I feel for you, then I need you to know that I love you, Adelaide Warren. I love you with everything I am." "You beautiful, foolish man," Adelaide said, laughing through her tears. "Do you really not know? Have you not noticed that I have been falling in love with you since the day you threw my indenture contract into the fire? That I think about you constantly? That I worry about you and fuss over you and find any excuse to be near you too? I love you, Harrison. I love you so much it terrifies me." For one perfect suspended moment, they just stared at each other, the magnitude of what they had both just confessed hanging in the air between them. Then Harrison bent his head and kissed her, and Adelaide felt like she was coming home to a place she never knew she had been searching for. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Adelaide wrapped her arms around Harrison's neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past weeks, and Harrison groaned and pulled her closer, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally broke apart, Harrison rested his forehead against hers, his hands cradling her face like she was something infinitely precious. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you," Adelaide said, and it felt like the truest thing she had ever spoken. "I love you, Harrison Vance." "I love you," Harrison repeated, and then he was kissing her again, and Adelaide thought she might die from happiness. They stood there in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains, holding each other and exchanging kisses and whispered words of love, until the sky was full of stars and the night was cool around them. Finally, Harrison pulled back slightly, though he kept his arms around Adelaide. "I want to do this right," he said seriously. "I want to court you properly, treat you with the respect you deserve, and then, if you will have me, I want to marry you, not because you work for me or because you feel obligated, but because you choose to, because you want to build a life with me." "I do want that," Adelaide said, smiling up at him. "All of it. But you should know, Harrison, I already chose you. I chose you the moment I decided to stay." Harrison kissed her again, soft and sweet, a kiss full of promise for all the days to come. "Then I am the luckiest man alive," he said. They went inside together, hand in hand, and Adelaide heated water for Harrison to wash with, while she prepared a late supper. They ate together at the table, their knees touching beneath it, stealing glances and smiles like love-struck youngsters. When the meal was finished, Harrison took Adelaide's hand and led her to the porch, where they sat together in the rocking chair, Adelaide tucked against his side, his arm around her shoulders. "Tell me about your dreams," Harrison said softly. "The ones you had before everything went wrong. What did you want from life?" Adelaide thought back to the girl she had been before her father's death, before the debt and desperation. "I wanted a family," she said honestly. "A home that was really mine, where I could feel safe. Children, maybe, to love and raise better than I was raised. Simple things, I suppose, nothing grand." "Those are not simple things," Harrison said. "They are the most important things, and if you will let me, I will give them to you. A home, a family, safety, love. Everything I have is yours, Adelaide. Everything I am is yours." "You already gave me the most important thing," Adelaide said, tilting her head to look up at him. "You gave me back my freedom, my ability to choose. Everything else is just a gift on top of that." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams and fears, learning each other in all the ways that mattered. Adelaide told Harrison about her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's slow descent into addiction. Harrison told her about the weight of watching his parents die, of being powerless to save them, despite his best efforts. They cried together and laughed together, and by the time Adelaide finally went up to her room in the small hours of the morning, she felt like she knew Harrison's heart as well as her own. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Adelaide could have imagined. Harrison was attentive and romantic in ways that surprised her, bringing her wildflowers from the meadow and carving small gifts from wood during the evenings. He held her hand whenever they were near each other, and he kissed her goodnight every evening before she went upstairs, sweet kisses that left her breathless and wanting more. But true to his word, Harrison never pushed for more than Adelaide was ready to give. He treated her with a respect and tenderness that made her love him even more deeply. They took long rides together in the evenings, exploring the boundaries of the ranch and beyond. Harrison showed her his favorite spots, a creek where cottonwoods provided shade, a high meadow where the wildflowers bloomed in riotous color, a rocky outcropping where they could watch the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Adelaide bloomed under his attention like the flowers in her garden. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes gradually faded, replaced by genuine happiness. She smiled more, laughed more, sang while she worked. She had never felt so cherished, so valued, so loved. 2 months after that first kiss, on a crisp September evening, when the aspens were turning gold and the air had the first hint of autumn's chill, Harrison asked Adelaide to marry him properly. He went down on one knee in the kitchen while she was washing dishes, a simple gold band in his hand that had belonged to his mother. "Adelaide Warren," he said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, not because you have to, but because you choose to? Will you build a life with me here on this ranch, share my name and my home and all my tomorrows?" Adelaide dried her hands on her apron, then pulled Harrison to his feet. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes to all of it. I will marry you, Harrison. I choose you. I will always choose you." Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time, drunk on happiness and love and the promise of forever. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Greeley. Adelaide wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Harrison had bought her in town, pale blue cotton that brought out the green of her eyes. Harrison wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his face freshly shaved. Thomas Pierce stood as Harrison's witness, and the minister's wife stood for Adelaide. The ceremony was brief and traditional, but when Harrison said, "I do," and Adelaide repeated the words back to him, the simple vows felt like the most sacred promise either of them had ever made. Harrison kissed his bride with such tenderness that Adelaide heard the minister's wife sniffle into her handkerchief. Afterward, there was a small celebration at the boarding house with a few neighbors and friends. Adelaide was touched by how many people came to wish them well, people she had come to know over the past months through trips to town and neighborly visits. It was clear that Harrison was well respected in the community, and now she was welcomed as his wife, as part of the fabric of this place that had become her home. When they finally returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, Harrison carried Adelaide over the threshold of what was now truly their home. He set her down gently in the main room, which Adelaide had decorated with wildflowers for the occasion, and looked at her with such love that it took her breath away. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream," Harrison said softly, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "That someone like you could not possibly want to be with someone like me." "I am real," Adelaide said, taking his hand and pressing it to her cheek. "This is real, and I am exactly where I want to be." Harrison kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Adelaide felt heat bloom through her body. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "My wife, my Adelaide." "I love you," Adelaide replied. "My husband, my Harrison." That night, in the privacy of the room they now shared, Harrison and Adelaide came together as husband and wife with a tenderness and passion that left them both shaking. Harrison was gentle with her, patient and attentive, making sure she felt cherished and safe. And Adelaide gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, trusting him with her body as she had already trusted him with her heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Adelaide's head on Harrison's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. Through the window, stars sparkled in the vast Colorado sky, and Adelaide thought she had never been so happy, so completely at peace. "No regrets?" Harrison asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. "Not a single one," Adelaide said, pressing a kiss to his chest. "This is exactly where I am meant to be." The months that followed were filled with the simple joys of married life. Adelaide threw herself into making the house truly a home, adding curtains she had sewn and rugs she had woven. She expanded the garden, putting in plants that would provide food through the winter. She learned to help more with the ranch work, becoming comfortable around the cattle and skilled with the horses. Harrison, for his part, was an attentive and loving husband. He still brought her flowers, still carved her small gifts, still made sure she knew every day how much he loved her. He consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valuing her opinion and insights. They were partners in every sense of the word, building something together that was stronger than either of them could have created alone. Winter came hard and fast that year, with snow piling high and temperatures dropping far below freezing. Harrison and Adelaide spent long evenings by the fire, Adelaide knitting or sewing, while Harrison repaired tack or carved. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from practical matters like what supplies they would need from town to deeper topics like their hopes for the future. It was on one such evening in late January that Adelaide realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time. She sat very still, her knitting forgotten in her lap, as the realization washed over her. She was almost certainly pregnant, carrying Harrison's child. Fear and joy warred within her. She wanted children, had always wanted them, but the memories of her own mother dying in childbirth when Adelaide was 12 were still vivid and terrifying. What if something went wrong? What if she died and left Harrison alone again? "Adelaide," Harrison's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "What is wrong? You have gone very pale." Adelaide looked at him, at the concern in his eyes, and knew she could not keep this from him. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Harrison went very still. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, so wide and genuine that it dispelled some of Adelaide's fear. "Truly?" he asked. "I think so," Adelaide said. "I have not had my courses in 2 months, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings. But, Harrison, I am frightened. My mother died giving birth to what would have been my baby brother. What if—" Harrison was across the room in an instant, kneeling before her and taking her hands in his. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You are not your mother, and this is not that situation. We will get the best care we can. I will ride to town tomorrow and talk to Dr. Henderson. Make sure he knows to expect a call from us. We will be careful, and we will do everything right. You are strong, Adelaide. You will get through this." "You promise?" Adelaide whispered. "I promise," Harrison said. "And if anything, God forbid, does go wrong, you need to know that you are the most important thing. Not the baby, not the ranch, not anything else. You, your life, your safety. That comes first, always." Adelaide pulled him close, holding him tight. "I love you so much," she said. "I love you too," Harrison replied. "Both of you." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, and Adelaide felt some of her fear ease. Whatever came, they would face it together. That was what marriage meant, what love meant. Not facing the world alone, but having someone beside you through everything. The pregnancy progressed through the winter and into spring. Dr. Henderson confirmed what Adelaide already knew, pronouncing her healthy and predicting a late summer birth. Adelaide experienced bouts of nausea and fatigue, but nothing too severe. Harrison was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying that she was working too hard or lifting too much. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Adelaide reminded him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years." "Not my woman carrying my child," Harrison said stubbornly. "Let me do the heavy work. You can supervise." Adelaide rolled her eyes, but could not quite suppress her smile. His protectiveness might be excessive, but it came from such a place of love that she could not truly be annoyed by it. As her belly swelled with the growing baby, Adelaide found herself dreaming about the future in ways she had never dared before. She imagined a child with Harrison's dark hair and her green eyes, or perhaps his gray eyes and her auburn curls. She imagined teaching a daughter to cook and sew, or teaching a son to ride and care for animals. She imagined Harrison holding their baby, the fierce protectiveness and deep love he already showed toward her, extended to a tiny new person. In late May, they received unexpected visitors. Adelaide was in the garden, pulling weeds when she heard horses approaching. She straightened, one hand pressed to her aching back, and shaded her eyes against the sun. 2 riders were coming up the path, and as they drew closer, Adelaide realized with a shock that she recognized one of them. "Margaret," she called out uncertainly. The woman dismounted quickly and rushed forward, and then Adelaide was being embraced by Margaret Dalton, the widow of the man who had owned Adelaide's contract before the auction. Margaret had always been kind to Adelaide, but Adelaide had not expected to ever see her again. "Adelaide!" Margaret said, pulling back to look at her. "Oh, my dear, look at you! You are glowing!" "Mrs. Dalton," Adelaide said, confused and pleased at the same time. "What are you doing here?" The man who had ridden with Margaret dismounted as well, and Adelaide saw that he was young and handsome, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Harrison emerged from the barn at the sound of voices, wariness in his posture until he recognized the visitors. "This is my son, Michael," Margaret explained. "He was back east at school when his father passed. Michael, this is Adelaide Warren. Well, Adelaide Vance now, I suppose." "Pleased to meet you," Michael said, tipping his hat. "We came because I needed to apologize," Margaret continued. "When my husband died, I was lost and frightened. The business was failing, there were debts I did not know about, and I panicked. I sold everything, including your contract, Adelaide, and I have regretted it every day since. When Michael came home and I told him what I had done, he insisted we find you and make sure you were all right. We went to Greeley first," Michael added. "The shopkeeper there told us you had married Harrison Vance and that you seemed very happy. But we wanted to see for ourselves, to make sure you were being treated well." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. She had not realized how much Margaret's decision had hurt until she heard this apology. "I appreciate that more than you know," she said. "But as you can see, I am well. More than well, actually." Harrison had joined them by this point, his arm sliding protectively around Adelaide's waist. "My wife has been the greatest blessing of my life," he said firmly. "And while I wish the circumstances that brought her to me had been different, I cannot regret the outcome." "I am glad to hear it," Margaret said, relief evident in her voice. "I have worried about you, Adelaide. You were always such a kind, hard-working girl. You deserve better than what life dealt you." They invited Margaret and Michael to stay for supper, and Adelaide was grateful for the chance to show them how well she truly was doing. Over a meal of roasted chicken and vegetables from the garden, Adelaide told them about how Harrison had bought her contract only to burn it, how he had given her the choice to leave or stay, and how that choice had led to love and marriage. "You are a rare man, Mr. Vance," Margaret said to Harrison. "Most men in your position would have taken advantage." "Most men are fools," Harrison said simply, his hand finding Adelaide's under the table and squeezing gently. Before Margaret and Michael left the next morning, Margaret pulled Adelaide aside. "I brought you something," she said, pressing a small leather bag into Adelaide's hands. "When I sold the store and settled the debts, there was a little money left over. By rights, some of it should have gone to you for your work. It is not much, but I want you to have it, for the baby." Adelaide opened the bag and saw a handful of bills, probably $50 or so. "Mrs. Dalton, I cannot take this." "You can, and you will," Margaret said firmly. "Consider it payment for all the work you did that I never properly compensated you for. Please, Adelaide, let me do this one thing to make amends." Adelaide accepted the gift with tears in her eyes, hugging Margaret tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for caring enough to come check on me." After Margaret and Michael rode away, Adelaide stood in the yard with Harrison, watching them disappear into the distance. "That was unexpected," she said. "But good," Harrison replied. "You deserve to know that people cared about you, that your life had value even before I came along." "You made me believe that," Adelaide said, leaning into his strength. "You made me believe I was worth something again." The summer progressed with relentless heat, and Adelaide grew increasingly uncomfortable as her pregnancy advanced. The baby was active, kicking and rolling at all hours, and Adelaide found it difficult to sleep or find a comfortable position. Harrison did everything he could to ease her discomfort, bringing her cool water and fanning her in the evenings, rubbing her swollen feet and aching back. In late August, Adelaide woke in the middle of the night to a strange sensation, a tightening across her belly that was different from the usual aches and pains. She lay still for a moment, trying to decide if this was something to worry about. Then another tightening came, stronger this time, and Adelaide knew with sudden certainty that her time had come. "Harrison," she said, shaking his shoulder. "Harrison, wake up." He was awake instantly, years of ranch life making him alert at the slightest disturbance. "What is it? Are you all right?" "The baby is coming," Adelaide said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear churning in her stomach. "You need to get Dr. Henderson." Harrison moved faster than Adelaide had ever seen him move, pulling on his clothes and boots in record time. "I will be back as soon as I can," he promised, bending to kiss her forehead. "You are strong, Adelaide. You can do this." Then he was gone, and Adelaide was alone with the pains that were growing steadily stronger. She got up and moved around the house, remembering what the doctor had said about how movement could help. She lit lamps and gathered the supplies they had prepared: clean linens, towels, water. She tried not to think about her mother, about the blood and the screaming and the terrible silence that had followed. Harrison returned with Dr. Henderson within 2 hours, though it felt like an eternity to Adelaide. By then, the pains were coming regularly, and Adelaide was gripping the edge of the table, breathing through each contraction with grim determination. Dr. Henderson was a gruff but competent man in his 60s, with gentle hands and a matter-of-fact manner. He examined Adelaide quickly and pronounced that things were progressing normally. "It will be a while yet," he told Harrison. "First babies usually take their time. You might want to make yourself useful by boiling water and gathering more clean linens." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort. Harrison stayed by Adelaide's side through all of it, holding her hand and letting her squeeze until his bones creaked, wiping her face with cool cloths and murmuring words of love and encouragement. Adelaide focused on his voice, on the steady presence of him beside her. using that as an anchor against the overwhelming sensations trying to pull her under. It was late afternoon when Dr. Henderson finally declared that it was time to push. Adelaide was exhausted, drenched in sweat and trembling with fatigue, but she gathered her strength for this final effort. Harrison supported her shoulders, his face close to hers, his words a constant stream of love and encouragement. "You can do this, Adelaide. You are the strongest person I know. Just a little more, my love. I am right here. I am not going anywhere. I love you. I love you so much." And then, after what felt like forever, there was a final push and a sudden release, and the sound of a baby's cry filled the room. Adelaide collapsed back against Harrison, gasping and laughing and crying all at once. "You have a son," Dr. Henderson announced, wrapping the squalling infant in a clean blanket. "A healthy, loud son." He placed the baby in Adelaide's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature with absolute wonder. The baby had a shock of dark hair like Harrison's and was howling his displeasure at being thrust into the world, his tiny fists waving. "Hello, little one," Adelaide whispered, touching one finger to a miniature hand. Instantly, the baby's fingers closed around hers, gripping with surprising strength. "Hello, my son." Harrison was leaning over her shoulder, staring at their child with an expression of awed disbelief. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Adelaide, you did it. You are amazing. He is amazing." "We have a son," Adelaide said, looking up at her husband with tears streaming down her face. "Harrison, we have a son." Dr. Henderson cleaned up Adelaide and checked that everything was healing properly, pronouncing her in good health and predicting a quick recovery. He left them alone as evening fell, promising to check back in a few days. Adelaide and Harrison sat together on the bed, the baby sleeping peacefully between them, and marveled at the tiny person they had created. He was so small, so fragile, yet so absolutely perfect in every detail. "What should we name him?" Harrison asked softly. They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at their son, Adelaide knew exactly what his name should be. "Henry," she said. "Henry Vance, after my grandfather. He was the kindest man I ever knew, besides you." "Henry," Harrison repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Henry Vance." He reached out and gently stroked the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world, Henry. We have been waiting for you." The weeks that followed were exhausting, but filled with a joy Adelaide had never imagined possible. Henry was a good baby, relatively speaking, sleeping for decent stretches and eating well. Adelaide recovered quickly from the birth, her strength returning as she adapted to the demands of motherhood. Harrison was a devoted father, absolutely besotted with his son. He would hold Henry for hours, talking to him softly or simply watching him sleep with an expression of profound wonder. Adelaide often found them together in the rocking chair, Harrison reading aloud from a book or newspaper, while Henry dozed against his chest. "You are going to spoil him," Adelaide said one evening, watching her husband rock their son. "Impossible," Harrison replied. "A baby cannot be spoiled by too much love." As summer turned to fall and then winter, the ranch settled into new rhythms. Adelaide managed to balance caring for Henry with her household duties, though there were days when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Harrison hired a young man named Johnny to help with the heavier ranch work, giving him more time to be with his family. Henry grew and thrived, his dark hair remaining dark and his eyes eventually settling into a shade of green that was somewhere between Adelaide's bright green and Harrison's gray. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and giggle, and watching him discover the world was a constant source of delight. One evening in late winter, after Henry had been put to bed and the house was quiet, Harrison and Adelaide sat together on the couch, Adelaide tucked under Harrison's arm. "Do you ever think about that day at the auction?" Adelaide asked. "About how different things could have been?" "Every day," Harrison admitted. "I think about how close I came to never knowing you. If I had been even a few minutes later, someone else might have bought your contract. You might have ended up somewhere terrible, treated badly or worse. The thought makes me sick." "But you did come," Adelaide said, "and you saved me, Harrison. You gave me back my life." "You gave me a life worth living," Harrison countered. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You brought joy and love and purpose. You and Henry, you are everything to me." Adelaide turned to kiss him, a soft, lingering kiss full of love and gratitude. "I choose you," she said softly. "Every day I choose you all over again." "And I choose you," Harrison replied. "Always." The years that followed brought changes and challenges, as all years do. The ranch prospered under Harrison's careful management and Adelaide's strong support. They added more cattle, expanded the house to include another bedroom, and became pillars of the small community around Greeley. When Henry was 2, Adelaide found herself pregnant again. This time, she was less frightened, her first successful birth having eased many of her fears. She delivered a daughter in the spring of 1881, a tiny thing with auburn hair and gray eyes, who they named Rose after Harrison's mother. Henry adored his baby sister from the moment he met her, wanting to help with everything and constantly asking if he could hold her. Adelaide and Harrison watched their children grow and thrive, with hearts full of gratitude for the family they had built together. 3 years after Rose was born, another son joined them, whom they named Thomas, after the neighbor who had inadvertently brought Adelaide and Harrison together by asking for help with the rustlers. Thomas was a robust, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. The house that had once been too big for Harrison alone was now full of noise and laughter, children running through the rooms and Adelaide's voice calling them to meals or chiding them gently for some mischief. Harrison would come in from the range to find his children climbing on him, demanding stories or attention, and Adelaide would watch with a smile as he patiently gave them both. On warm summer evenings, the whole family would sit on the porch together. Harrison would play his harmonica, a skill Adelaide had not known he possessed until years into their marriage, and Adelaide would sing old songs while the children danced or played. These simple moments became the foundation of their family's story, memories that would be treasured for generations. When Harrison turned 40 and Adelaide 36, they took stock of their life together and marveled at how far they had come. The ranch was thriving, producing enough income that they were comfortable, if not wealthy. Their children were healthy and happy. Henry now, a gangly 13-year-old, who was already showing signs of the good man he would become. Rose, a spirited 10-year-old with her mother's determination. And Thomas, a rambunctious 7-year-old with boundless energy. But more than the material success, it was the love that filled their home that mattered most. Adelaide and Harrison had built something precious together. A family founded on choice and respect and deep, abiding love. They had weathered difficulties together, harsh winters, difficult seasons, the occasional injury or illness. But through it all, their love had remained constant, a bedrock they could both rely on. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Adelaide leaned her head on Harrison's shoulder with a contented sigh. "Do you remember what you said to me the day you brought me here?" she asked, "about giving me a choice?" "I remember," Harrison said, his arm tightening around her. "I told you that you could leave or stay, that the choice was yours." "I made the right choice," Adelaide said softly. "Staying with you has been the best decision of my life." "You made me the luckiest man alive when you chose to stay," Harrison replied. "Every day with you has been a gift, Adelaide. Every single day." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, comfortable in the knowledge that they had built something lasting and true. Their children's laughter drifted from inside the house, and Adelaide felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She thought back to that terrible day on the auction block, standing in the blazing sun, afraid and alone, certain that her life was over. She could never have imagined then that such despair would lead to such joy, that the man who bought her freedom would become the love of her life, that she would find a home and family in the vast wilderness of Colorado. But Harrison had given her more than freedom that day. He had given her hope. He had shown her that kindness still existed in the world, that not all men were cruel, that love could bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances. He had given her a choice, and in choosing him, she had found herself. As the years continued to pass, Adelaide and Harrison grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their children grow into adults, Henry taking over more and more of the ranch work, Rose marrying a kind young man from town, Thomas heading east to study veterinary medicine. They welcomed grandchildren with joy and wonder, marveling at how the family they had started continued to grow and flourish. Through it all, their love remained the constant. Harrison still brought Adelaide wildflowers in the summer. Adelaide still made sure Harrison's favorite meals were waiting when he came in from the range. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still held hands across the table at meals, still chose each other every single day. When Harrison was 65 and Adelaide 61, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together their children, grandchildren, and friends from all over the region. Looking around at the crowd of people laughing and celebrating, Adelaide was struck by how much had changed since that day at the auction, how many lives had been touched by the choice Harrison had given her. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Harrison led Adelaide to the porch where they had spent so many evenings together. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was sweet with the scent of roses from the garden Adelaide had lovingly tended for 3 decades. "Do you have any regrets?" Harrison asked, the same question he had asked on their wedding night so many years ago. Adelaide looked at her husband, at the silver threading through his dark hair, at the lines that time and sun had etched into his face, at the eyes that still looked at her with the same love they had held the day he told her he loved her. She thought about their life together, about the children they had raised, the home they had built, the love they had shared. "Not a single one," Adelaide said, and meant it with her whole heart. "You gave me freedom, Harrison, but more than that, you gave me love. You gave me a home. You gave me a life worth living. How could I possibly regret any of that?" Harrison pulled her close, and they stood there under the vast Colorado sky, holding each other as they had done countless times before. "I love you, Adelaide Vance," he said softly. "I have loved you from the moment you chose to stay, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Adelaide replied, "my Harrison, the man who gave me a choice and then made me so glad I chose him." They remained there long into the night, 2 souls intertwined, bound together by a love that had started with an act of kindness and grown into something profound and unbreakable. The ranch slept peacefully around them, a testament to what could be built with love and hard work and unwavering commitment. In the end, Adelaide thought, that was the greatest gift Harrison had given her. Not just freedom from bondage, but the freedom to choose love, to choose happiness, to choose a life filled with meaning and joy. And she had chosen well. Every day for 30 years, she had chosen him, and every day he had proven himself worthy of that choice. As they finally went inside to sleep, hand in hand as always, Adelaide sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever fate or providence had brought Harrison to that auction on that scorching August day. Without that moment, this life would never have existed. These children, these grandchildren, this love, none of it would have been. But it did exist. It was real and solid and lasting. And it had all started with a choice, to leave or to stay. Adelaide had chosen to stay, and in doing so, she had found not just a home, but her home. Not just a man, but her man. Not just a life, but the life she was meant to live. And that, Adelaide thought as she drifted off to sleep in Harrison's arms, was the greatest happily ever after she could have ever imagined.